She was prone to depression. I probably got that from, that part of my personality from her. I was prone to depression even as a child.
Hmm.
And so she was a different generation. She worked really hard in a high stress job. She raised 5 kids. 4 of us came out like one right after the other. And she was not raised in a way that, you sought out therapy or even asked for help. You just sucked it up and you did it.
Yeah.
So by the time my mom was 25 or 27, she had 4 kids.
Wow.
Under the age of, 6 or something.
Wow.
And she was working a very high stress job as an emergency room nurse. So I picked up on her depression and her stress. And because I was a kid, I assumed, it was all about me. Like there was something wrong with me. Yeah. And because my older siblings and my younger siblings have much more even temperaments, and I did not, I was the loud one who cried a lot and who, was demanding more of her attention. So she and I kind of butted heads for most of my life. And, I was this sort of rebellious, independent, question authority type of person. And all those things, for a woman raised in the 50s, those were kind of dangerous, right? So she tried to kind of squelch them in me, thinking it was for my own benefit. The world was going to be kinder to me if she could get me in line. And yet that was not me. I had my own drummer I was marching to. And so,
so out of all the siblings, were you the only one marching to your own drum, or were any of your other siblings like that?
The youngest, who came along like 10 years after the rest of us, by then my mom had, she kind of, I guess we'd conditioned her. So I think she just let my youngest sister she rolled with the punches a little bit more. Plus, my youngest sister, she was a little, quirky and edgy and independent and strong-willed and strong-minded, but she was also sweeter than I was. She was and she had 4 older siblings who were like ready to babysit her and take care of her. So my mom didn't really have to stress out quite as much with that one. So I think, my relationship with my mother actually did really contribute to a lot of my insecurities. And it was just accidental. I mean, these things happen. But one of the reasons I even wrote the book was kind of to show that my addictions started in my childhood with this lack of self-esteem and this lack of attunement with my mother. And, my father, he worked long hours, so he wasn't around enough to really protect me from what was happening. And, as I've gotten older, understanding what life was like for my mom, who's a very complex human being. As a kid, I expected her to be nothing but my mother. She's not supposed to have a life or stress or her own issues and problems. And part of my growth and maturing has been to understand her and, forgive. I guess you could use the word forgive, but the truth is just understand. My mother did the best she could. By then, of course, your kids are always going to be a little messed up. That's the nature of parenting.
Yeah.
And so, but they were my decisions to address my insecurities with drugs and alcohol. Those were my decisions, not my mother's. You know what I mean? I own that.
So when did the drinking begin? Obviously, you've got a very busy household. You've got a lot of siblings. You've got a mom who's working nonstop. You're battling insecurities and depression. I'm sure you were out at a high school party, and then that first drink just made you feel normal, gave you confidence, made you step out of your own insecurities and into kind of a superhuman character, right?
Yeah, it's exactly like you described. I mean, you nailed it. You nailed it really well for someone who's not an addict, actually. My first drink made me feel normal. It was given to me actually by a guy. I was like 14. I was babysitting for this guy, and he was a really cute doctor, and he apparently had a fight with his wife. So they came home. She went into the bedroom, and he brought me in the kitchen and poured me a tequila shot. And I'm like, all right, I'm gonna have a drink with this really cute doctor. Anyway, nothing happened, right? Then he drove me home. I had 2 shots, but I felt as soon as I had that shot, confident and attractive and witty and all these things that I'd never felt before, that I always would see in other people, thinking, how do they do that? How do they make friends? How are they so charming and extroverted? I drank and I thought, oh, this is what they feel like normally. so I was like, all I need to do is keep drinking this, and then I can be like everyone else. I can make friends. I can, you know, attract boys. I can feel normal.
Good
And
old liquid courage.
there you go.
Here
And
we
so I
go.
just, you know, and I said, I'll find that path. And then very shortly after that, like a year and a half later, something like that, we got uprooted and moved to Texas. And it was really kind of a traumatic thing that happened. Like there was a bankruptcy, and so we lost our really lovely life in San Diego. I lost all of my friends that I just started making in high school. So the timing was really bad. And I handled it in this, you know, the move and this, you know, small town atmosphere and just the whole uprooting thing by just drinking. I made a couple friends who were just as rebellious as me in the panhandle of Texas. And we just binge drank every weekend. And that's how I got through high school. I liked school, so I wouldn't drink Monday through Friday. And then Friday night, Saturday night, I'd just get plastered. And so by the time I left high school and came to Austin, where I now live for college, I had a pretty severe drinking problem already. And then I started, I dropped out of college. I became a speed freak. I started shooting up meth almost as soon as I got to Austin. That didn't last very long. Like 6 months from beginning to end, but it did sort of end up with me dropping out of UT and then having to go to a strip club just to pay the rent, which is where I ended up having access to booze every single night. So I wasn't using really hard drugs. I was using like X and acid and mushrooms on occasion, but I was 18 and drinking 5 nights a week. And so that's when my alcoholism just took off.
Wow. So it's funny. I didn't use that many hard drugs, just acid, mushrooms. You know, it seems like to the average person, that's hard drugs. I don't know. So speed, you know, it's really interesting. So, you know, you move to Texas, you start doing, sounds like drugs, heavy drinking. You know, you started stripping, like you said. But then your world kind of just completely changed and evolved when you got into this whole rock style lifestyle and you met one person. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So when I started stripping, even though I was drinking too much, you know, I wasn't like passing out every night. That kind of came later. But I was getting drunk like 5 nights a week. So I was working 5 nights a week. I was also slowly getting back in touch with my identity, because my drinking in high school and the meth use interrupted that natural maturing process where in your teens and early 20s, you're becoming an individual. You're figuring out who you are.
Yeah.
And that all got interrupted for me. I had a very vague sense of who I was. I was a creative person, a writer. I was a highly sexual woman. I was someone who questioned authority. I was very political. I had a rebellious streak. But, you know, most of these qualities, you know, they have good and bad sides, but those were very innate to who I was. And I was just starting to really incorporate them and own them in those years from 18 to 20, the first couple years when I was stripping and I was off the really hard drugs and I was just drinking. And I actually went back to school and went back to college, started doing well this time instead of flunking out of everything, because I really did love school. And I wanted to be a screenwriter. So I was just finally building the life that I should have built a few years earlier. And right at that time, as I was just kind of getting that toehold in this sort of sense of identity, which is just vital. You have to know who you are in life, or you're going to be unmoored really easily. And that's what happened. So I met this guy who's larger than life. I mean, he's one of the greatest rock musicians of all time. I didn't know that when I met him. A friend of mine who was dating his bass player introduced him as just this guitar player singer guy from the 70s. I thought he was like maybe a one-hit wonder or whatever. And I hadn't met anyone special in a long time. And I was like, yeah, I'll meet him. I probably won't be interested in him. And then I'll go home, but I'll be polite and meet him. And I fell in love within like 15 minutes. It was really he was so different and unique, but it was like kismet. Like I literally heard a voice in my head say, this is the man you're meant to marry. And I believed it. I still believe that to this day. I just felt like Joe and I were meant to meet. And it wasn't until the next day, he was like in town to play a concert. So after we spent the whole evening together, really falling for each other, then he says like, well, I'm going to leave you some tickets for the show tomorrow. And I was like, great, maybe I'll like his music. And then I go to the show and I watch him start playing, and I recognize all the songs, and I was like, oh my God, this guy's like a rock star. I know all these songs. And then I thought, well, he's never going to call me. He's a rock star. I was just a one night stand, and I was just completely devastated. But then he did call me. So long story short, over the next few months, we start dating. He comes to Austin, and then eventually I start going to LA. And within a few months, he's my boyfriend. And I'm suddenly living this like fairy tale lifestyle. He's 40, I'm 20, and he's an alcoholic and a cocaine addict. And I knew better than to touch cocaine for a few months because of the 6 months I'd had with speed. I knew that I was very susceptible to stimulants. I couldn't care less for downers. You could throw the best heroin or Xanax or whatever at me. And I was a mellow introverted person. So I wanted to be extroverted and energetic. So coke, speed, crack, those were my drugs. And of course, he kept different hours than I did. So I'd go out to LA or travel with him on the road, and he'd be up from like 4 PM to 6 AM. Well, my hours only overlapped with his by about 6 or 8 hours a day. So I told myself, well, I'll just use a little coke so I can stay up with him. I'm only going to see him like, 1 or 2 weeks this month. Anyway, long story short, I started out doing Joe Walsh with my cocaine use. Within a couple of years, I was literally outdoing him. And if you know anything about Joe Walsh's cocaine use, that's really saying something.
So I want to push the pause button real quick. So for those who don't know who Joe Walsh is, tell us who Joe Walsh is.
Okay, so Joe has basically been a rock star since like his college years. He's an incredible natural talent. So he had a couple of not so well-known bands in high school and maybe his early years in college, and then he formed the James Gang, which a lot of people know, really amazing band. And then from there, he joined the Eagles in I guess the 70s. And so he's on Hotel California in the Long Run, are probably two of the most recognizable albums that he did. But as far as his solo work, there was Rocky Mountain Way. That's one of his biggest hits, and a number of others.
So when we say rock star,
the James
we're talking
Gang, the Eagles, and then Joe Walsh.
Yeah. Now, when you say rock star, you guys, we're talking about one of the biggest rock stars. Huge. Yeah. A big name.
Yeah, like he's been on the cover of Rolling Stone, I'm sure, a few times, and he's considered one of the top 100 guitarists of all time. And yeah, so I had this on top of being truly madly, deeply in love with my Prince Charming. Like if he'd have been an accountant, I would have been in love with him and, moved in with him. It just so happened he was a rock star. So the upshot of that was I had a lot of fun and I had a lot of great stories to put in my first book. The downside of that is that it makes addiction look really glamorous, and like you can't possibly be an addict if you're doing coke in limos with Sam Kinison and other famous people. It's a really great way to convince yourself you don't have a problem if you're not losing your house or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I got to I after a couple of years, I quit work, moved in with him in LA, and we traveled the world, partying our butts off. And then after a few years, things really started, the bad times started taking over. There were more bad times than good times. And the fights got so vicious that I beat him up once, he beat me up once. There were all kinds of affairs. Even in the worst years, though, we did have some really great times. But at one point I was snorting so much coke that I put a huge hole in my septum. And then I decided, well, I may as well just start smoking it. I always had my justifications for doing what I was doing. I wanted to stay up late to be with the man I loved, so I have to start snorting coke. And I can't damage my nose anymore, so I have to start smoking it. So that's when I became a crack addict. Yeah.
So this lifestyle, like you said, I mean, it's hard to quote unquote call yourself an addict when you're not losing your house or, on the streets. I mean, you guys are living this full, amazing quote unquote rock star lifestyle. But as amazing as it does sound, I mean, just the highs and the lows and the depression, how long would you say it was fun? And then how long would you say you were just utterly depressed, battling your demons? And how
I would
long did this whole lifestyle last for you?
So we were together for a 6 year period, for 6 years over a 7 year period.
Got it.
We met in 88, and then the final split was in 95. I would say the first 3 years were mostly great. And then once I moved in with him, things really started to decline for me because I no longer had a job and sort of a stable life. Like the first 3 years, I had my apartment in Austin. So I'd tour with him for 2 or 3 weeks out of every month. And then I'd go home and kind of dry out. I mean, I would drink at work, but I wasn't doing Coke every week. Or, once I quit my job and moved in with him, and he kind of saw this coming, but he was in love with me and he didn't know what to do. He wanted me with him. And I think when he first met me, he thought, well, she's overcome a speed addiction. She was shooting up speed and she overcame that all on her own. So he kind of thought he's got a strong woman. Like he was, kind of thought, I've lucked out. I've got someone who can actually handle my lifestyle, but he was just wrong. And so the second 3 years of our relationship were more dark than light. And in the middle of that, actually, we were together for like 4 years, and when we got engaged, but we never even set a date. Things really went south because I had just started smoking crack at that time. And so when we split up, we went back and forth a few times, and because we didn't have any coping skills or relationship skills or breaking up skills. And eventually the breakup was for good, and I moved to Las Vegas to start stripping again. But I was so depressed because I realized I still loved him and that I'd really blown everything. This is part of my story. I was a pretty privileged kid. I was raised in middle-class America with parents who didn't physically abuse me. I have a sharp mind. I was a straight A student. I got a free ride at UT, threw it all away. All of it, just threw it away. Then I meet the man of my dreams who's going to give me the lifestyle beyond my dreams. And I blew that too because I couldn't put down the crack pipe long enough for him to get a ring on my finger. Like I had a lot of shame and self-loathing over what I had done. I'd been gifted by the universe this amazing life and all these opportunities, and I just chucked them. So I felt so bad about that. And I also had lost my identity. Over the years, I had given up my creative, quirky, political, rebellious, sexy identity and just become this Joe Walsh's girlfriend. That's all I was. So once he was gone, I was nothing. I was like the hole in the donut. I had no substance. I had no identity. I had no, no degree. So while I was stripping, keeping a roof over my head, I was heavily in debt because I charged so many ATM withdrawals, like tens of thousands of dollars for the crack that I was buying. So I just thought I'm gonna drink myself to death because once I got to Vegas, I kind of quit the Coke and the crack because I didn't have any money. I couldn't afford it. Joe wasn't paying for it anymore. So I just thought, I've got all this free booze in Vegas. You get free booze everywhere. I'll just drink myself to death. It can't possibly take me more than 2 years at the rate I'm going. And I was right. I almost died less than 2 years later. But that's what I wanted. I mean, I really wanted to just end it all. I saw no reason for me to be. I was just terribly ashamed, and I had disappointed everyone. And I cut everyone out of my life, my family, my parents, all my siblings, except my youngest sister. But even her, I kept at arm's distance. And then I was in and out of the hospital. I had alcohol poisoning a couple of times. And then the final time was the day I got sober. I was so sick. I thought, well, this is it. This is the day I'm going to die. And that was in 97. And so Joe and I had been broken up for 2 years, and I had just spent that 2 years trying to drink myself to death, and I almost did it. And then I was laying there really unable to move or talk for most of the day. Just all I did was just vomit repeatedly. And something just told me, take a really hard look at what you're doing, because you have a choice here. You can keep going, or this is your last chance to change your mind. And it was like this veil was lifted. Because I recognized that I could die that day, but for some reason I wasn't excited about it. And I had been actively pursuing this goal for 2 years. And I thought, why am I not excited about this? Why am I not happy about it? I feel nothing. And then just, you know, the denial that I was in just sort of dissolved. And I realized this is not what I meant. This is not how I meant to go. I believed I had a purpose. I thought I'd blown it, but I did believe that, and I've always believed that there's more to this life than meets the eye, you know, that there is a higher consciousness there.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. So over the 2 years, there was no desire to get help. You didn't seek help by any means. You were just trying to kill yourself through alcohol. And there was one instance where you went to the hospital, essentially almost dying, throwing up all over the place. And there was something, a higher power that said, you have a purpose.
Yeah.
And that's the last day you drank? I was
in the hospital 3 times, actually.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear that last question.
No, I said, so you were in the hospital. You basically were throwing up, dying, and then you felt this higher power take over you. It just basically said that you have a purpose here in life.
I had this strong sense, yes, that the reason I decided not to go to the hospital that day. I'd been 3 times already, and I owed them so much money that I refused to let, I woke up at a friend's house and I wouldn't let them take me, and they had to go to work. And they thought, I know they thought when I come back, she may be dead, but they were going to lose their job if they didn't go to work. And I wouldn't let him take me to the hospital. So I was laying there all day in his bed, and I felt like I could die at any minute, but I didn't. You know, I was literally laying there from like 8 a.m. till noon or 1 p.m. or so, just as sick as, and in so much pain, I couldn't even describe it. And I just had this sense that I was in this holding pattern until I decided which way I wanted to go. And that was my thing. I didn't ever want to make any decisions. I wanted life. I just wanted life to lead me around. And that way I wasn't accountable for where I ended up. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like I let my life, I followed Joe around. Whatever Joe's lifestyle was my lifestyle. And then when I got to Vegas, I got a job, but I didn't really put in any effort to turn my life into something. I just, like, I never would take ownership of my life and my choices. And I felt like I just had this really strong sense of intuition. I used to hear voices sometimes, actually, in moments of high stress. I would hear like, and I twice saw an angel that literally came to me and said, "It's going to be okay. This is what you do." But that day there were no angels, there were no voices, but just this sense that it's all up to you. You get to decide. And I thought, this is not how I'm meant to go, and I have to give it one more try. And so I thought, I stripped with a few girls that were sober, and I thought, I'll call one of them. One of them had always said, "You call me when you're ready." Mm-hmm. And so I called her. I think the next day I was able to speak again. And as soon as I made that decision, I had been testing counting my heart rate every now and then all through the day, and it was over 200 all day long. As soon as I made that decision, it dropped under 200, and that's when I knew I was going to live. And I did call that friend, and I asked her to meet me at a meeting, and she was out of town, but she told me where to go, and I went. And my goal at that point was do the steps, prove they don't work, and then I can go back to drinking myself to death with a clear conscience. It's just that they did work, so that's how I ended up.
Wow, I'm so glad it proved to be wrong on that one.
Yeah.
So talk to me about like what that week looked like, what that month looked like, and what that first year looked like. Because somebody who might be listening right now, who was in your position or is in the position where you were at, where they just don't want to live, they want to drink themselves to death, but at the same time, they need that glimmer of hope. Like, what did that first week look like, month look like, and year look like? Because I know it wasn't easy.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. And I faced a lot of challenges early on, but the first week, what I remember the most was that every day I physically felt just a little bit better. I was 29. So, you know, there are a lot of people getting sober at 49 and 59, and, you know, it's harder for the body to bounce back. I feel very, very lucky. It took many years for me to undo a lot of the damage, and some of it I never will undo. You know, there's some intestinal stuff, but I felt like death warmed over for so much of those last 2 years, that just to be able to physically, it took me like 3 days to be able to walk down the length of a grocery store aisle, and then I couldn't walk back if my friend had to actually carry me back to the car. But I started feeling more and more normal, and within a week, I was able to actually go back to work. But I was also going to meetings. I went like every other day. So I went to like 2 or 3 AA meetings, and I hated everyone in there. There were like 15 people from all walks of life. I didn't understand what the hell they were talking about. What is this hope and gratitude? Like, I'm dying here. Do you see that I'm dying? What the hell are you talking about? You're making no sense to me. But what did make sense to me was that they kept telling me it's going to be okay. We're going to show you how to get better. And we're going to love you till you love yourself. And I thought that was a little weird. Like, what's wrong with you that you love, you're not seeing things. You're clearly a little delusional if you love me, whatever. But they also seemed to have their crap together, And I thought, nobody else wants me around, so I'll just keep coming here. There was something that kept bringing me back, and I slowly started to get it. So that first week was just kind of, every day I didn't quite know what was going to happen, but there were little signs. There was a place to go where people seemed to want me there, and they said they had answers. And then physically I started feeling better. And so then the first month, I was going back to work and I was making good money, and people kept telling me, like everyone from my landlord to the people at the 7-Eleven where I would used to buy my, I used to drink really, really high-end wine when I was with Joe Walsh, like the best champagne and, Cristal and the, $100 bottles of wine for lunch. But I was reduced to drinking like $6 Kendall Jackson from the 7-Eleven. And I was so bad off in those last 2 years that when I stopped coming in, they thought I had died. And so I'd go to 7-Eleven to get a pack of cigarettes or whatever. And everyone would be like, oh, you're alive. You look so good. Like, and my landlord didn't even recognize me. So I was getting a lot of positive reinforcement. My boss was just, jaw-dropping thrilled. The girls that I worked with. And my mother, she was one of the first calls I made. As difficult as things were between her and I, we loved each other. And she was really encouraging. She was, I get teary when I think about it, but my mother was the best mother you could ask for as soon as I got sober, because and my father was so excited. He jumped on a plane. He practically grew wings and flew to Vegas. He was so excited. And that was really special. So I was scared. I was terrified because I had a lot of repair work to do on my life. I was heavily, heavily in debt, but I also had this amazing job that I loved where I was making a ton of money all of a sudden. So I could see God working in my life. Is the best way to put it. I'm hesitant to use the word God because I know that not everybody, who needs to get sober, wants to get sober, believes in a higher power, whatever that higher power is for other people. I believe that there was one working very hard in my life, and there was too many coincidences and too many the path being laid out for me. And I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. And then when I started working the steps, I got a really, really good sponsor, that same girl that I worked with as a stripper. And she taught me the steps out of the big book. The steps worked for me, by the way. I know there are other ways to get sober. It's not the best path for everyone, but it's what I needed. They taught me the coping skills and the principles on which for me to build a new life and to build a new identity. And things kept getting better. And the stronger I got, and the more sober I got, the more challenges would come my way. But I had the tools to handle them. And the one thing I think that kept me going more than anything else, especially that first year and onward, was that I knew if I found a purpose, I'd probably blown whatever the one I was supposed to fulfill. It felt like I'd blown it, but I would find another one and do my best. And I had always wanted to be a writer. And so within a couple of years of getting sober, I started writing short stories and some poetry, and it took a while. I didn't get published for about 6 years, but I had a purpose. And I feel like that, for me, next to the program of recovery that showed me how to get sober, my dreams of being a writer were why I stayed sober. So to me, that was really important. And so things got better. You know, there've been a lot of challenges in the last 23 years, but
We all
they've
have
all
them,
made
right?
me a better person. They've all,
Yeah.
yeah, they've all contributed to giving me a life that I never thought I could have.
Well, I like that you're saying that because, you know, a lot of people that I interview, it's there's a lot of fear and people are scared to get sober. They're afraid to look at themselves internally and find out who they are and look at themselves. And then I like the way that you were just slowly building up confidence and rebuilding relationships and even going into the 7-Eleven and having people say, "Wow, is that you? You look healthy." You know, those are just signs that you know you're improving your health, you're improving not only your physical but your mental. And you know, to be able to reconnect with your mom and your dad who flew out like that, I mean, it's amazing. And you know, I'm people aren't going to be able to see you right now, but I'm looking at you. You look healthy, you look strong, you look fit, you know, you're smiling, your skin is glowing, you know, you've got this aura about you. And it's just so fascinating to listen to you talk about where you were and, you know, shooting speed and doing coke nonstop and even smoking crack. I mean, now look where you are. And you know, for someone who's listening who's struggling, just know that, you know, you've been through it, you've seen it all, and you can do it. So for somebody who is listening who might be struggling, I mean, what is your biggest piece of advice for them?
I would say one of maybe the two most important pieces of advice would be um, have those fears and just, you know, courage is moving through those fears. It's not the absence of fear. I was afraid. I had a lot of fears, and I'd go into meetings and I'd talk about these fears, and people would say, "Oh, you know, most of those aren't even going to come true." Not for me. Baloney. They all came true.
Hmm.
All my worst fears came true, but they all had a purpose. In hindsight, I realized I couldn't be where I am or who I am had I not done that. I was afraid I'd get fat. I was afraid I would not know how to be in relationships. How do you go dancing or have sex without drinking? Like that was completely like, I thought I would have to get a boring job or a mainstream. I had to do all of that. I did gain weight. And then I lost it. It also helped me detach my identity from my body. You know, I was way too attached as a stripper to how I looked. And once I got fat, I had to start loving myself for different reasons. That was really, really important for me. As soon as I started to do that, I lost the weight. I did have to get a mainstream job. I was a realtor for 9 years, and then I got more, you know, crazy, sexy jobs after that. But being a realtor taught me how to be dependable, how to be a good negotiator. That's a vital skill in this world. So sometimes these gifts look like, they don't look like gifts when they come to you. You know what I mean? Learning how to date in a whole different way than the, you know, hook up one night stand, get to know each other the next day if he's still there in the morning. You know, having a different type, learning how to have relationships a different way has enabled me to have better relationships. So all of those fears, some of them are actually going to come true, and you're going to be better for it. Just try to remember that. And I would say also having a purpose, and learning to forgive yourself. I think a lot of people, maybe they do have a purpose. They have kids or a job that they love. I didn't have any of that. If you don't have that, find something, because you do have a purpose. We all do. You wouldn't be here otherwise. And then, you know, forgiving, I had to forgive a lot of people who had hurt me. But I really had to forgive myself. And that took 1,000 times longer, because if anyone had done to me what I'd done to myself, I'd hunt them down and kill them. So it took me a good 10, 20 years to fully forgive myself for the way I'd really blown my life. And if you don't do that, you're never going to feel deep down that you deserve much better, and you're going to like subconsciously sabotage yourself. You have to accept yourself as human. You know, we're all flawed, and you know, I do my best to overcome my flaws, but I also embrace myself as imperfect. And I think it's really hard for a lot of addicts, because we carry so much shame we won't even admit to ourselves how much shame we carry. And I think that one of the biggest blessings of sobriety for me was I had 17 years of therapy, and I needed every day of it. I needed. And so I went to AA for 7 years. I go on fairly rare occasions now, but between But I work the steps in my daily life. And then, so seek out whatever kind of therapies in recovery works for you, and forgive yourself. It's a little bit every day.
Words of wisdom, you guys. Thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate it, Kristin. So I want to give your book a plug. I've been reading it. I mean, on this podcast, we're not even scratching the surface of the details that are in this book. So you guys go buy it. Rock Monster, My Life with Joe Walsh. Where can people find that?
Pretty much everywhere, and Amazon, any bookstore, Barnes and Noble, whatever. It's and the paperback is coming out in September. So if you prefer paperbacks, you can place a pre-order now on Amazon.
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool. All of us have, I'm sure, one time in their life wanted to live that rock style lifestyle. You did, you've experienced it, and you share a lot of it in the book, which is, it's really exciting. Let's leave it here. How can people connect with you if they want to find you?
It's really easy. KristinCasey.com. All my coaching work is there. Anything about my writing, this book and my next book will be on there. So it's all incorporated under KristinCasey.com. And Kristin is spelled with an I-N, KristinCasey.com.
Well, Kristin Casey, thank you so much for being on the Recovery Rockstars Uncut podcast. Thank you for being such a source of light and an inspiration. And thank you for sharing your story and helping end the stigma around addiction.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan of your podcast. I love what you do. These stories of hope, we need them all. And yeah, it's been a real honor to be here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.